In this episode, we start by building a practical mental map for how privacy changes when you move from older, legacy infrastructure into modern cloud platforms. Because the biggest mistakes come from assuming the technology shift is only about speed and cost. New learners often picture privacy as a policy topic that sits above the systems. But infrastructure choices quietly decide who can access data, where it can travel, how long it persists, and how easy it is to prove that protections are working. When an organization runs some systems on premises and others in the cloud, the mix can create gaps where data slips into places nobody expected, especially when teams rely on defaults or copy old habits forward. The goal here is to understand the main infrastructure and platform options at a high level, what privacy strengths and weaknesses they tend to introduce, and how to make decisions that keep privacy intent consistent across environments. You do not need to be an engineer to grasp this, because the most important part is learning to ask the right questions about control, visibility, and shared responsibility. Once you can connect architecture choices to privacy outcomes, you can reason through exam scenarios with confidence rather than guessing. A helpful starting point is to clarify what people mean when they say legacy, because the term can hide several different realities. Legacy often includes older servers and applications hosted on premises, older network designs built for a fixed office perimeter, and older data storage practices that were created before modern privacy expectations were common. These environments may have stable routines and predictable operations, but they also tend to carry long-lived data, broad internal access, and limited automation for enforcing retention and deletion. By contrast, cloud environments are built around rapid provisioning, elastic scaling, and service-based building blocks, which can improve security and privacy when designed carefully, but can also create new exposure if controls are inconsistent. The key privacy connection is that legacy environments frequently rely on manual processes and tribal knowledge, while cloud environments rely on configuration and automation that can replicate mistakes at high speed. Beginners should remember that neither environment is automatically safer, because privacy depends on how data is classified, how access is controlled, and how changes are governed. When you treat legacy and cloud as different toolkits for achieving the same privacy goals, you can choose designs that preserve intent rather than merely following trends. You also need to understand the shared responsibility idea at a high level, even if you never memorize a formal model, because cloud shifts who controls what. In a legacy on-premises environment, an organization often controls the physical servers, the networks, the operating systems, and many security controls directly, which can feel like total control but also means total accountability for weaknesses. In cloud environments, the provider controls the underlying physical infrastructure and many foundational services, while the organization still controls what it deploys, how it configures access, and how it handles data. The privacy risk comes when teams assume the provider handles privacy automatically and stop thinking about data flows and permissions. Another risk appears when teams assume they must replicate every old control exactly as it was, which can lead to unnecessary complexity and misconfiguration. A mature approach is to identify what parts of the stack you must manage and what parts are managed for you, then design controls that align with those boundaries. When beginners can explain that responsibility is shared rather than transferred, they avoid the most common misunderstanding that creates privacy exposure in cloud migrations. A practical way to compare infrastructure options is to look at the service models, because they describe how much of the stack you manage. Infrastructure as a service, IaaS, is closest to traditional computing, where you manage the operating systems, applications, and data, but the provider manages the physical hardware and foundational infrastructure. Platform as a service, PaaS, provides managed platforms like databases and application runtimes, which reduces operational burden, but also means you must understand how the managed service handles storage, backups, logging, and access. Software as a service, SaaS, delivers complete applications managed by a vendor, which can reduce your direct technical control while increasing the importance of vendor governance, data contracts, and configuration of privacy-related settings. The privacy trade-off here is subtle. Moving up the stack often reduces your ability to customize controls, but can improve consistency if the provider's controls are strong and properly used. Beginners sometimes think more control is always better, But more control can also mean more opportunities to make mistakes or to forget to apply protections. The best choice depends on sensitivity, regulatory expectations, and the organization's ability to operate controls consistently. Once you see those models, you can evaluate privacy through three consistent lenses: where data is, who can access it, and how change is managed. Where data is includes the primary storage location, replicas, caches, backups, and disaster recovery copies, because privacy promises fail when data persists in hidden places. Who can access it includes not only administrators and developers, but also service accounts, vendor support roles, and automated systems, because modern platforms rely heavily on non-human access. How change is managed includes how new resources are created, how permissions are granted, and how configurations are reviewed, because cloud environments can change rapidly. In a legacy environment, a change might require a planned maintenance window, while in cloud a change might happen in minutes, which raises the risk of accidental exposure through misconfiguration. Beginners should practice connecting privacy risk to these lenses, because exam questions often describe a technology choice indirectly, such as a shift to managed databases or new integrations between systems. When you ask where, who, and how change, you can reason about the privacy impact without needing tool-specific knowledge. Network and isolation choices matter for privacy because they control how easily data can be reached, and beginners sometimes underestimate how many privacy failures are caused by unintended reachability. In legacy environments, networks may be built around trusted internal zones where broad access is common, which can make it easier for internal misuse and lateral movement during incidents. In cloud environments, isolation is often more flexible, allowing you to separate environments, restrict pathways, and reduce unnecessary exposure, but only if teams implement those boundaries intentionally. A key concept is segmentation, meaning you keep sensitive systems and data stores separated from general systems so not everyone can reach everything. Another key concept is secure connectivity between on-premises and cloud, because hybrid designs often create tunnels or links that make two environments behave like one, which can accidentally extend legacy trust assumptions into cloud resources. Privacy protection improves when connectivity is limited to what is necessary and when sensitive services are not reachable from broad networks. When learners understand that privacy is impacted by who can even reach a system, they begin to see infrastructure as a privacy control, not just plumbing. Identity becomes central across legacy and cloud, because in modern architectures, access control is often the primary line of defense for privacy. Identity and access management, IAM, is the discipline of defining who or what can access systems, what they can do, and under what conditions, and it applies to human users and automated services. In legacy environments, organizations often relied on network location and shared accounts more than they should have, which makes it harder to prove who accessed what. In cloud environments, it becomes easier to implement fine-grained access, but it also becomes easier to accidentally grant broad permissions that spread across many services. Privacy depends on least privilege, meaning access is limited to what is needed, and on separation of duties, meaning no single role should be able to do everything without oversight. Beginners should also recognize that service-to-service access can be the largest source of exposure because automated systems often run continuously with powerful permissions. When IAM is designed thoughtfully, privacy benefits because fewer identities can reach sensitive data and every access can be traced and reviewed. Data storage technology choices also shape privacy outcomes because they influence how data is organized, replicated, and retained. Legacy environments might store data in traditional relational databases, file shares, or application-specific stores that have grown over years, often with inconsistent classification and retention practices. Cloud storage options can make replication and distribution effortless, which improves resilience, but can multiply copies of sensitive data if not governed. A beginner-friendly way to think about it is that modern platforms make it easy to create many versions of the same dataset for analytics, testing, and backup, and each version is another place privacy must be enforced. Privacy improves when storage is designed with clear ownership, strong access boundaries, and a lifecycle plan that covers retention, archiving, and deletion. Another important consideration is whether storage supports encryption by default and whether encryption keys are managed in a controlled way, because encryption can reduce exposure if the environment is compromised. The point is not to memorize product features, but to recognize that the storage choice influences how controllable and auditable the data lifecycle will be. Logging and monitoring are also infrastructure decisions with privacy consequences, because visibility can protect data while also creating new data. In legacy environments, monitoring might be limited or inconsistent, which reduces the ability to detect misuse or breaches, but also limits how much personal information appears in logs. In cloud environments, logging can be very rich and centralized, which is valuable for security and troubleshooting, but rich logs can accidentally capture sensitive fields, identifiers, or user content. Privacy-aware design means deciding what should be logged, how long logs should be kept, and who can access them. And it means applying minimization principles to telemetry as well as to primary datasets. Security information and event management, SIEM, is a common concept for centralizing security logs, and the privacy angle is that centralization can increase exposure if access is too broad or if retention is excessive. Another control concept is data loss prevention, DLP, which focuses on detecting and preventing sensitive data from moving into unauthorized places, and it becomes especially relevant when cloud makes data movement fast. When monitoring is designed carefully, it supports accountability without turning operational data into an uncontrolled secondary store of personal information. A major privacy risk during cloud adoption is environment sprawl, where organizations create multiple accounts, projects, regions, and environments without a consistent governance model. Beginners often imagine a single cloud environment, but real organizations quickly end up with development, testing, staging, and production environments, plus temporary experimental environments created for short-term needs. If personal information flows into non-production environments for convenience, privacy risk increases because those environments often have weaker controls and less monitoring. A privacy-aware infrastructure strategy includes clear rules for where personal information may exist, how it is masked or de-identified for testing, and how access is controlled across environments. It also includes disciplined lifecycle management for resources, so temporary environments do not become permanent unknowns. This is where automation can be a privacy advantage, because standardized deployment patterns can enforce baseline controls consistently. However, automation can also be a privacy risk if the baseline is wrong, because misconfigurations can be replicated widely. The key takeaway is that consistency across environments is a privacy control, and infrastructure decisions should support that consistency rather than undermine it. Hybrid environments, where legacy systems and cloud systems coexist, introduce special privacy challenges because data often travels across boundaries in both directions. Organizations might move customer data from on-premises applications into cloud analytics, or they might use cloud identity services to manage access to legacy systems. These integrations can preserve business value, but they can also create complicated data flows that are hard to map and hard to control. A privacy-aware approach begins by making data flows explicit, defining which systems are authoritative sources, and limiting replication to what is necessary. It also includes aligning retention and deletion rules across environments so that data does not get deleted in one place while persisting indefinitely in another. Another hybrid risk is that legacy trust assumptions can leak into cloud designs, such as assuming internal networks are safe and therefore reducing authentication rigor. When trust assumptions are carried forward without reconsideration, cloud resources can end up more exposed than intended. Beginners should remember that hybrid is not just two environments. It is a single ecosystem with multiple control planes, and privacy requires that the ecosystem behaves predictably across its boundaries. Platform choices should also be evaluated for how they support privacy governance tasks like classification, consent tracking, and policy enforcement, even if those tasks are implemented at higher layers. Some infrastructure environments make it easier to tag datasets with sensitivity labels and to enforce access boundaries based on those labels, which supports consistent handling. Other environments make it easy to create unmanaged copies of data, which undermines governance even when policies are clear. A practical beginner insight is that privacy programs succeed when they can scale controls, not when they rely on perfect behavior from every team member. Infrastructure that supports centralized policy, standardized identity management, and strong auditing makes privacy controls easier to apply across many systems. On the other hand, if the platform encourages decentralized, ad hoc resource creation without strong oversight, privacy intent is more likely to erode through small exceptions. The exam-relevant idea is that technology selection is part of privacy engineering, not separate from it, because tools can either strengthen or weaken the organization's ability to enforce principles. When you frame platforms as enablers of governance, you can make choices that reduce reliance on manual enforcement. A final area that often surprises beginners is how resilience and availability choices can collide with privacy if they are not designed together. To keep services running, organizations replicate data across zones and regions, keep backups, and build failover mechanisms, and all of those create additional copies of personal information. Resilience is valuable, but it must be paired with lifecycle controls so data does not become unbounded. A privacy-aware design ensures that replicas are protected with the same access rules, that backup retention aligns with data sensitivity and legal needs, and that disaster recovery processes do not accidentally restore deleted data into active environments without awareness. It also ensures that archiving and long-term storage are purposeful, controlled, and accessible only under strict conditions, because privacy responsibility does not end when data is moved out of production. Beginners should see that high availability does not excuse over-retention, and operational safety does not require keeping everything forever. When resilience is built with privacy in mind, the system can be both reliable and respectful, which is the kind of balanced engineering judgment the certification emphasizes. As we conclude, the most important idea is that infrastructure and platform choices are privacy decisions because they determine how data moves, how access is granted, how controls are enforced, and how evidence is produced when questions arise. Legacy environments can provide familiarity, but often carry broad trust assumptions and manual processes that make consistent governance difficult. Cloud environments can provide strong, scalable controls and automation, but they can also magnify misconfiguration and sprawl if teams rely on defaults and move too fast without guardrails. A clear way to evaluate any approach is to ask where data will live across its copies, who can reach it through identity and network pathways, and how change will be governed so protections remain consistent over time. When service models like IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS are chosen with those questions in mind, the organization can preserve privacy intent even as technology evolves. If you can connect platform decisions to minimization, disclosure governance, retention, and defensible deletion, you are thinking in lifecycle terms, which is the most reliable way to prevent privacy from being treated as an afterthought. That integrated mindset is what allows privacy engineering to work across legacy and cloud without losing the original purpose and trust that made the data collection acceptable in the first place.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.